All I think about these days, all I think about these days is getting at that goal that's in my heart. I need a reason to believe, yeah, maybe a cure for my disease.
That song is by Blaine Long. My name is Matthew Blades. Meet my friends.
Hi, it's Tim.
And Beth from the Mulhausen Group Real Estate.
We are so proud to sponsor another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It. You can catch us at tmgphoenix.com.
That's a good group of people right there. Hi, it's Matthew Blades, host of Learn from People Who Lived It. And a reminder before we get into today's show that each of these episodes is presented uninterrupted with the support of the Mulhausen Group, with the support of ASI or Advanced Systems Integrations. They design and install cutting-edge audio and visual equipment. So if you're on the IT staff or you're the IT director, please reach out to ASI. This audio visual integrator has offices in Minnesota and in Scottsdale and 2 decades of experience. And the cool thing about them, they pay real close attention to that last 5%, which is the one that drives you and I crazy. We've got a link to ASI in our show description, or you can go there yourself by visiting asi-av.com.
All I think about these days, all I think about these days is getting at that goal that's in my heart. I need a reason to believe, yeah, maybe a cure for my disease.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
Hi, I'm LeAnn Hull, and I'm 61 years old.
LeAnn, what story are you here to share?
I'm here to share the story of loss and survival after my 16-year-old son, Andy, completed suicide.
Who do you hope hears this?
Everyone and anyone.
We're going to open up today's podcast a little different than we have in the past, and that's because LeAnn's written a book. The name of that book is How to Live When You Want to Die. And I've asked LeAnn if she would up front read us that first chapter so you guys have a clear understanding of why she's here. Whenever you're ready, LeAnn.
Chapter 1 is titled No Answer. On December 11th, 2012, as my workday began winding down, I called my 16-year-old son's cell phone to find out his schedule after baseball practice. It rang and rang and rang. No answer. Strange, as Andy always answered my calls, even when he was upset with me. Don't panic, I kept telling myself. Keep calm. Maybe he lost his phone, or he's turned off the ringer. I was sure he would see that I was calling and buzz me right back. But even as I was having this private conversation with myself, my stomach started feeling queasy and unsettled. It was that funny feeling you get in your gut when you sense that something isn't quite right. The longer I went without hearing from him, the worse things became. My heart began racing, and I felt some sense of impending doom. Life was in full swing for Andy and the other varsity baseball players, so clear communication between us was essential, and he knew it. We always talked several times each day. I called Cameron, a buddy of his from school, to see if he had seen Andy, but when Cameron answered, he told me that he was just coming back from the University of Arizona, where he had been visiting with the college baseball coaches. Cameron hadn't even gone to school that day and had no idea of Andy's whereabouts. Now, slightly more panicked, I called another one of his friends, who told me that Andy had left school just after second hour that morning around 9 o'clock. With this new piece of information, I was feeling full-fledged panic and horror, as it was now 3 o'clock and it was 6 hours earlier that Andy had apparently walked off the campus grounds and disappeared into thin air. Andy rarely missed school, and he certainly never left school without a good reason. I closed my computer at work and frantically headed out to my car while calling friend after friend after friend of my sons, and their parents too, to see if anyone had seen my Andy. Earlier in the day, I had asked Craig, a friend of mine who was retired, to go to my house and meet some prospective house cleaners. I was fairly sure I wouldn't be able to leave work early enough to meet them myself, so he happily agreed to meet with them at my house that afternoon. As I was now practically running in the direction of my car, I called Craig to see if maybe Andy was there with him at home. I called and called and called, but he didn't answer either. All the way home, as I sped down the road to my house, a feeling of dread consumed me like I'd never before experienced. After I had exhausted the list of Andy's close friends that I had numbers for, I also called all of his coaches and anybody else I could think of who might have a clue as to Andy's whereabouts that afternoon. What is it that instinctively warns us that something terrible has happened? Is it intuition? Is it God trying to prepare us for what awful things he knows lay ahead? Or is it just our body's chemistry kicking into action on overdrive? As I turned the corner onto my little street and made my way toward my house, I saw the worst thing any parent could ever see. Paramedics and fire trucks lined the street right in front of my home. Even now, many years after the fact, I can still see pictures, that scene in my mind like it was yesterday. I threw my car into park, flew open the car door, and ran toward my house screaming. But the first responders wouldn't let me anywhere near my house. I yelled, "Where's my son?" Out of the mouth of a deputy sheriff came deafening words I was never prepared to hear. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. He's dead." I dropped onto the concrete.
I'm fighting back tears as I listen to you read that because I have kids of my own. And that's got to be a hard situation to roll up on and see. So I'm sorry you had to live with that and see that.
Even now, it's as clear as day.
So, Frank, we're jumping right in, clearly. This is a different kind of podcast.
Yeah.
When you hear that opening chapter, what do you think and feel?
I don't have kids, and I am still beside myself at the thought of that. There's a lot of terrible things that can happen to you in life, and no one has ever come up with anything that's worse than losing a kid.
The reason that we have LeAnn on the podcast today is because, unfortunately, she's not alone. Unfortunately, teenagers do this every single day. And then the family goes on without their child, and there's all kinds of things that have to shift and change and move. And really, we are here to learn from you today, LeAnn. I mean, if I can impress anything upon you in this podcast, it's that we're here to learn from you today. Frank and I have never been through this situation. We don't understand the magnitude of maybe what happened, right? In all the little, and I say that in all the little ways that it probably showed itself. Can we just start with the actual day? Can we stay in the day? So you find out that your son is dead. You're on the concrete, on your knees. What happens next?
An amazing first responder sat there with me until I was ready to get up and just listened to me scream. And, I've told many other parents who've lost children, many people, you wonder, what is it that compels you to finally get up off the concrete? Do we have an innate sense in us, a will to live? Because something propels you up, and something propelled me up. And to begin, even then, having to make the phone call. My husband was out of state. To call my husband and have to tell him that, well, he's out of state. To try to get a hold of my two sons who were deployed, military, and having the Red Cross try to help find them where they were. All of the details of the things that so many people are just, you can't even get past the fact that someone's lost a child to suicide, and then you have to manage all the rest, or someone does. And I would tell you that probably my core personality gave me a leg up. And where did that come from? Did that come from my childhood? Was I born with that? Is that nature, nurture? I don't know, combination of both. But who I was at that moment in my life, I had some tools already in me. And I like being in charge. I've always liked being in charge. And so being in charge meant, even at that moment, I wasn't going to take a back seat, and I wasn't going to be a passenger in this journey. And I know that that has helped me in so many ways. And so they wouldn't let us in the house. And my daughter and grandkids were there. I have little grandkids, and they were all home. And fortunately, no one really heard the gun. Andy shot himself in his room, and no one heard that. We had a big house, and no one saw Andy. I'm thankful for that. And so they took us over to the neighbor's house, and immediately hundreds of kids started showing up at the neighbor's house. All of the varsity team, the JV, all these boys, all these kids from the school. And it was an instinct in me to want to give them hope, I guess, to tell them that Andy, it was weird, the things that came out of my mouth. I wanted them to know that Andy would never have done anything to hurt them. He didn't mean this. This was not about them. He loved them. And I didn't want them to ever, any of them, to feel like any of them had failed him. And so I found myself, in a sense, while I'm still sobbing and shaking and in shock, comforting them. And I did a few things that I think were really pivotal that day. In our society, one thing that's so normal and natural is when people are suffering or struggling, oftentimes we want to give them a glass of wine, give them a Xanax, whatever it is to calm them down, because it's so uncomfortable for us to watch someone that's in so much pain. And so as I sat there at the dining room table, my girlfriends were all trying to give me a glass of wine, and I pushed it away. I didn't drink for a year after Andy passed. And I didn't take any Xanax. I didn't take anything. And I knew that that was going to be important for me to work my way through this. And then
it makes a lot of sense. If you don't mind me interrupting, it makes a lot of sense that you would want to feel all the things. And Dr. Frank, I kind of want to bring you in too, because you've alluded to this before. It's so normal for us when we are going through something hard to want to comfort other people other than ourselves. And in some ways, that is how we comfort ourselves, is by taking care of other people. But would you mind speaking to that for just a moment? Because she's in that place where, this thing has just happened. This horrible thing has just happened. But you feel this beautiful sense of let me take care of these kids. Let me give them hope. Let me make sure they feel okay about this horrible thing, which is really quite beautiful when you dial it all down. But where does that come from, Frank?
Well, actually, I was going to ask a question along those same lines to you, LeeAnn. In that moment, these things that you're telling, all of his classmates and teammates, it's not about you. He wouldn't do this to hurt you. You didn't fail him. Did you believe those things about yourself in that moment? Or, did you not necessarily believe those things about yourself, but you were trying to reassure other, where did you stand in that moment on the things that you were telling other people?
I can tell you that I have never blamed myself or even gone down that road. And so I had a really divine gift that day. And going forward, what has taken over in me and allowed me to respond in the way that I did. And I had every reason to blame myself, because I yelled at Andy that morning before he left for school, because he was struggling in some of his classes. And so the last thing that Andy heard me say, the last conversation that he and I had, it was angry, and he was not happy with me. And so I could have easily, and then one of the moms, when she got there, she said, I think that my child is the reason that Andy took his life. And so there were lots of information. There's lots of stuff going on in my head. And I knew that blame wasn't going to change anything. Blaming myself, blaming anybody else. And my biggest fear at that moment was I didn't want anybody to follow in his footsteps, because he was the light of everybody's life. So if there was ever a kid that was the least likely to complete suicide, it was Andy. And you could have asked 100% of his coaches, his youth leaders. There's not a person that would have said anybody else but Andy. His nickname was Sunshine. So this, to me, if Andy could fall, that meant he was that put all these other kids at risk.
Yeah.
And that's what I was afraid of.
And I imagine, Matthew, that we're gonna explore that piece a little bit more too, especially for the other parents out there who are thinking, obviously not wanting it to happen to them or to their child, and what can they do and that kind of thing. We're going to get into that. I want to wrap up the piece about sort of that moment though. And I'm not surprised to hear you say that you believed about yourself the same things that you were telling other people. It's a cliche, but it's true, right? Usually how we treat other people is merely a projection of whatever we have going on, right? And so if you all of a sudden started yelling and blaming other people, you could probably make the case that on some level you were maybe blaming yourself, but you were kind of projecting it outward, right? Same thing on the positive end, where you didn't feel that toward yourself, which is great because there's no need for you to, and you were able to share that with everybody else too. So it's not uncommon for the things that we sort of throw at other people, good and bad, to be in line with whatever we're kind of throwing at ourselves.
Did you feel really supported that first few days, that first month, that first 3 months? Was there a level of support that kind of shook you a little?
There were a lot of people that showed up, but I would tell you that from my personal experience and in working with a lot of other parents who've lost kids, in that moment, you can't even accept the support. You're in such shock that you're not even sure what's going on around you. And so I had people that wanted to spend the night at my house that night. There was one of my girlfriends, she says, "I'm sleeping with you." And I said, "You have to go." I couldn't take too much. It was too much for me to process. What anybody else, it was almost like they enhanced the moment, and the moment was bad enough, and their presence made it worse. So support, I loved what they did in bringing me meals and bringing me food so that I didn't have to think about those things. But personally, I needed my space. I didn't want that. I didn't want to talk to anybody about it. I didn't want to hear their pacifications. I didn't want to hear their cliches, their oh, well, God's got a plan, or he's in a better place. I probably would have annihilated someone if they said that.
Well, and this is the reason that I bring it up. Frank and I talk about this all the time. It almost comes up in every podcast in some way, shape, or form that when these events happen to us, the people around us have zero clue how to act and own and operate. They just don't know. And so they reach for these silly things like cliches, right? Like God's got a plan. It's like, you're going to have to tell me how that helps me 24 hours after my son has committed suicide.
Right. Maybe
even if he does
later. Yeah.
Even if he does have a plan, you're going to have to help me understand how that's going to help me right now.
Yeah.
And so people just don't know how to act. And then did you experience some of what we heard from Carrie in episode 1 of the series 1, where people then almost would stop saying his name around you after a while?
I really didn't give them a chance. And I've taught people this, that I owned the conversation no matter where I went. And so it didn't give anybody, and I don't like being in the back seat. So if I'm going to meet someone and we're going to begin to have a conversation, and, I have a tattoo that has Andrew's name on it. I wear his picture on I give people every opportunity to go, "Oh, who's that?" or "What's that?" That's my 16-year-old son. He died by suicide. So, and his name is Andy. And let me tell you about him. So that's what I've done from the beginning is, let's just get over how he died, really just get over it. And let's move on to, let me tell you how he lived. And that way I can own, and I'm not stuck in that panic and that fear of being the receiver of whatever comes out of their mouths. So I control the conversations wherever I go.
Wouldn't you say to Dr. Frank that if you're talking to people, right, about your son, and they don't have a reaction that's good or positive, they might not be your people.
Oh, gosh.
Well, there's going to be some people that don't have an appropriate reaction at all, but there's going to be people that then kind of try their best and maybe don't get it right. But I mean, I think you nailed it, right? You took control of the narrative. And I guess my question is, were you able to step into that right away, or did it take any amount of time? Because I feel like it takes a lot of people, if they're ever able to do that, it takes them a really long time to get there. But I have a hunch you got there a lot faster than some, or than most.
When I was still at the neighbor's house and I made my first trip to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, you know, I remember really clearly as I shut the door and I looked in the mirror, and you're just like, it's like you're reconciling that this has happened to me. It's not some newspaper clipping. It's, oh my gosh, it's me. And out of my mouth came two things. Between the not drinking and what I said in the bathroom really paved my way forward. I said, I will praise you in the storm. And I'm not the first mom to lose a kid. And those were weird things to come out of my mouth at that moment. But what I understood was that I was a woman of faith. And so I knew then if ever faith was important, it was now. And that was a decision, not an emotion, because my emotions would never have been able to carry my faith, but my decision could. And then by saying I'm not the first mom to lose a kid made me not feel alone. I could reflect upon people of the Holocaust, or you know, the genocide, you know, all over the world, the losses and the terrible losses that people have gone through. And that made me feel if they could survive, so could I. And those were really, I didn't know the magnitude of the thing, how important those things were when they came out of my mouth, but they delivered me forward. And I focused on those things, decisions versus emotions. I would have the emotions, but then I used my tools in my toolbox to take me from the emotional place over to the decision place so that I could look at the emotions and go, now what am I going to do with them? Because if you're still in that emotional spot, you can't process them except just fall apart.
Well, would you mind walking us through like how you did that? Let's assume there's somebody listening right now that's absolutely stuck, who's experienced your thing, and they're really like, okay, emotions, you want to stay in bed. You don't want to get up, or you don't want to meet friends anymore. You don't want to live life anymore. So take me through it, LeAnn. How would you get yourself out of that?
This is the best example that I use over and over again, that when we left and we were able to go home that night, they had first told us we couldn't go home that night. And I said, there's no way I'm not going home. I understand you don't want me to go in his room, but I'm going home. And he was on a body bag in the front of the house. And I laid on him and wrapped my arms around my 16-year-old body bag. And as I would come home, as the days would go on, and I realized that every day that I came home, those were the images that I was seeing. I was seeing the fire trucks, the paramedics, the body bag, and I was having all those same emotions all over. It was having a chemical reaction on my body. I was in panic mode just leading up to my road, and I was hyperventilating, and I realized I couldn't live like that. So I would literally tell myself, stop. And I understood that just stopping the images wasn't going to be enough. I had to replace them. And so I picked one image. It was actually a vignette. So it's not just an image, it's a little story. And I knew that this story, I picked something. It wasn't just a random thing. So when people say, oh, just pick happy thoughts, your brain, it's too muddled. You can't have a bunch of other stuff going on. You've got to have something that's immediate to divert you from those images you're already seeing. So I'd tell my brain to stop, LeAnn. And I'd say it out loud. And then I would play this vignette of Andy on the pitching mound. And it had just happened a couple of months before he passed. And these scouts, there were scouts from all over the country there to watch him pitch because he was so amazing. He was a left-handed, amazing athlete with just a gift. And he pitched lights out that day. And the guys, the scouts with the radar guns behind the backstop, and he just delivered. And I get goosebumps now just thinking about it. As he leapt off the pitching mound like a gazelle, I realized that he had just sealed his future. And that reaction that it has in my body, it happens 100% of the time when I tell that story. And so I knew that if I could get from those images to that story, that by the time I'm over here going through this story, my mental process has changed. It doesn't take away the horror of what happened, but it puts me in a better place to manage the horror. So now I'm looking at those images instead of here. I'm looking at them at a distance, and I can make decisions. What are you going to do now? Are you going to call a friend? Are you going to go for a hike? Are you going to listen to some music? I'm going to determine what I need to do to continue the process to separate myself from those images. That took 2 years before it became natural. And most people give up. It's kind of like going to the gym. Okay, we go to the gym and we think, oh, we're going to come out this amazing specimen. No, you've got to work at it and work at it. Same with your brain. So to not have given up on that, I didn't know that it was going to work. Honestly, it wasn't like I said, this is the plan, LeAnn. I just knew the pain was too unbearable and those images were too unbearable. And then by the time 2 years had gone by and I was like, wow, I can talk about the body bag. I can talk about blood in his bedroom because it has no hold over me now because I am on the pitching mound. I'm not even there anymore. I can't even make myself go there. So it did work. And having this arsenal of tools I had to know what I was going to do, be prepared. You can't just say, stop the images. And then you're left here going, because they come flooding back. It's an active journey. It's not a passive journey. Most people think, I just want it to get better. And in time, it'll heal. No, you will heal it in time if you do the work. Only if you do the work.
A+. I can see it in Frank's eyes too, right?
I'm sitting here trying to figure out how we take that and how we bottle it,
right?
And how we bring it to other. And literally, you being here, sharing this, is part of that bottling process as best as we possibly can. But I'm sitting here going, wow, if everybody who went through something horrible knew how to do what you have figured out how to do,
right,
they would be a little less miserable. And don't get me wrong, they are rightfully miserable because whatever their thing is awful. But wow,
I didn't want to be there anymore. So, I hear it's not an easy journey. And so I do understand why so many people don't take it. It was exhausting. It took repetitive work. I tell people that I read 80 books the first year after Andy died.
Wow. 80.
And I hear all the same excuses. I can't read. My vision's blurry. I can't focus. I can't remember what I read. You're preaching to the choir here. You're not talking to someone who doesn't understand that. I couldn't see either. I understand the physical, but I knew that if I didn't want to be there anymore, I had to do, and I didn't have the tools necessary. So I had some, but I needed more. And so I wanted to read and read and read. I needed every tool I could possibly get. I didn't read books on suicide. I didn't read books on depression. I didn't read the 5 flippin' stages of grief because I think that's a bunch of crap.
Get it. We're here for it, LeAnn.
Tell us how you really feel, please.
I know. I'm here for it. Every little bit of it.
I could go through all 5 stages in a minute.
Right.
So it was like, what are you talking about? They're not 5 progressive stages. It's like, which one am I at today? And where am I going to be? And I didn't want to read about that.
It's that whole whack-a-mole. It's that whole whack-a-mole philosophy. And that's how these things are. And eventually what you come to learn, and you did, was that it's exhausting to keep beating down all the things. You have to finally figure out how to get on the pitcher's mound. And and that's something that you've kind of been able to do. Can we go back to a little bit about learning from you in those year or two after this incident with Andy? Was it harder to parent? Was it harder to be a wife? Was it harder to be in your professional life? What can we learn from you in those couple of years?
Yes. All of the above. The first year is, I would tell you that almost the whole family and friends, everybody within in the circle are really going through just shock, and what a blessing that is, because that does allow us to put one foot in front of the other. And each time you do that, each time you get through Mother's Day, birthdays, anniversaries, Christmas, all the holidays, each one of those things that you survive, it's a building block for you to go, oh, okay, there's a little more confidence, a little more hope that you're going to survive. And that shock, I don't tell people usually, so hopefully there's no one here listening, but my second year was worse than my first. And that's because the shock is worn off and the friends have disappeared. Your support system is gone. And the reality has set in that, oh, this sucks. And everybody else's lives are now they're going on. His friends were graduating and going to prom and all the things that your kid is not doing, or your loved one, whatever you're going through. The rest of the world goes on, and your reality has finally set in that's not going to be happening for you. And so how do you live in where you're at and create a new path forward? And so the kids, it was interesting for me because I thought that they would be more supportive of me. And maybe because my other kids were older, they were, Mom, you think you're the only one that's hurting. You think you're the only one going through this. We lost a brother. We're doing, and honestly, it was really hard for me to have compassion for that. It was hard for me to relate to that. And so they each found their resources themselves, because I've said that within the family, it's really hard for us to help each other. We need people who aren't going through what we're going through to be able to step in and lift us up, because the rest of the family, either they'll jump in with us in our pit, or we jump in with that. It's just a very difficult situation with family. My husband, we're very, very fortunate that we had been married for so long, and already, we owned our business. We had gone through a lot of life together. So we understood that we couldn't be any more different people. We're totally opposite of each other. And so why would this process be any different than the rest of our life? And so we had to leave space for that and grace. And I wanted to talk about Andy, and my husband Clay didn't. And I went on and created a nonprofit and did presentations in schools. And what I knew early on is that I couldn't bring that home and process that with him. I had to find my own support group. And so I did. I found a group called Helping Parents Heal. And I became associated with some other moms where we could process our journeys together, and that would allow our husbands or our spouses to process theirs their way. And there are dads that are in our group too, but not as many as women, because women like to talk,
Well, it is an interesting thing, and I say this all the time. It's like guys seem to be a group of humans that just want to go at everything alone. There's something innate in us that just says, no, I must do this by myself. And it's just not true. And you women are, I mean this with a huge compliment, are so good at using resources, leaning on people, just talking things out. And so it doesn't surprise me that you went one way, he went the other.
We're also fixers, and that's a problem in this kind of a situation, because I wanted to fix my other kids, and I wanted to fix my husband, and I couldn't. And that was the biggest lesson for me to learn, is that I had to, the best thing I could do for them is to continue helping myself. and not cramming it down their throat. Not going, oh, this is what I did today, and oh, look at what I hear, the things that I'm doing, and blah, 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 because they didn't want to hear it.
So, Dr. Frank, do you mind if I ask you a question really quick? Because she said something here just a second ago that I really liked, which is she said, our whole family was in the pit. And so for any one of us to offer up some sort of a solution wouldn't be helpful. So we have to reach outside ourselves. For people that are really in the midst of a moment right now, can you almost add some weight to what she just said?
The people that are normally your biggest support are now the people who are hurting just as much, right? And LeAnn, I think you described the piece between you and your husband in particular really well, that like you understood that the way that you were about to deal with this was different. There's a lot of divorce that seems to happen after a child is lost. And it's usually because those two parents are probably processing things differently. And the talker wants the non-talker to talk, and the non-talker wants the talker to stop talking. And eventually, they don't get on the same page there. And instead of fitting that, or trying to shove that square peg into a round hole, you found a square hole.
Right. Okay, perfect place to hit the pause button and invite you back for part 2 with LeAnn, where unfortunately she has to reach back into that toolbox. We'll find out what's going on next time on Learn from People Who Lived It.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1. To help you feel less alone. 2. Encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3. When you're ready, share your story with us.
Hi, it's Tim.
And Beth from the Mulhausen Group Real Estate.
Thank you for listening to Learn from People Who Lived It.
You can find them online at tmgphoenix.com. Thank you so much for spending a little time with us. We're about to listen to the lead track off the new album from Blaine Long called Bacon. A quick reminder that asi-av.com, that's that audio-visual company I was telling you about. This woman-owned company has more than 2 decades of experience, and if you're on the IT staff and you've got your next build-out, please reach out to these folks. They work with schools, they work with corporations, they work with just about everybody, and they pay really close attention to that last 5%. Visit them online at asi-av.com. Okay, Blaine Long and Bacon off the new album, Royal.
She bit my heart, she didn't break it. Well, she took a big bite, said it tastes like bacon. Lips like Presley, moves like Elvis. You forget about your heart when she shakes her pelvis. Hey. Oh, we got nights to dream and wings to fly. Still young, but not tonight. I wouldn't have it any other way. We got gravy boats and mortgage payments. It's been so long since I've seen the rain. That's where I'll be when I die. Where I'll be when I die. We got nights to dream and wings to fly. We're still young, but not tonight. I wouldn't have it any other way.